My name is Kathy Swift and I live in Limerick, but between September 1985 and August 93 I lived in England. I was graduating with an arts degree in 85, and at that stage everybody with an arts degree, I went to UCD, everybody with an arts degree basically was migrating, and I went to the careers office in UCD and I said I wanted to continue doing postgrad in what I did. I did archaeology and history, and essentially I had 3 interviews with them, and they basically said, well, this is how you'd get a job in the civil service. And I said I didn't want a job in the civil service, I wanted to do postgrad specifically in archaeology. And because I wasn't getting anything out of the careers office and there really was no money to do postgrad, there were no postgrad grants at that stage, I started researching the possibility of getting grants in England. And at that stage you did your final arts exams in September. So 2 weeks before I did the finals, I got an interview in Durham, and the day my finals started I got a letter saying that I'd got a place. I have very clear memories of getting on the boat to go to Durham, and I had a suitcase and I sat up on deck. And it was a lovely sunny day actually, and I remember thinking, God, this feels so 19th century and American Wakeish, and just like Peg and all her offspring. And the first night when I arrived in Durham, because I mean Durham wouldn't be a place that a lot of Irish people went to, and the place I was staying was right at the top of this very steep hill, and there were wheels on the suitcase but they were banjaxed, and I was pulling the suitcase up the hill and kicking it every 5 seconds to try and get it to stay upright, and thinking, what am I doing here, can I go home? There were funny things that I found strange. I found that people seemed to be a lot taller and blonder than I was used to, and they had different flavoured crisps. I remember that was one of the big things. I was lucky because I found a local boyfriend with a car. So I travelled around a lot actually. I got to know the north of England fairly well because of that, and it was very different from Ireland. And it was also, I mean, even though there wasn't any problem with language or anything, you did feel as if you were completely immersed in a new culture and you know, just seeing a different type of society or whatever. At that stage, Durham was just coming out of the miners' strike, and there was a lot of mines closing. So there were things like, in the evenings, for example, all the pubs in Durham would have bouncers on the door as a regular thing, and there would be loads and loads of bobbies with helmets and truncheons and things wandering around. And Durham is a beautiful little town with you know, medieval streets and cobbles, and it, you know, the violence of the Friday night. It wasn't that it was violent, but the preparations in case of violence really struck you as very forcibly. But then, as I say, I had a local boyfriend, and I remember going out to his nan's for tea, and that was very much like going to my own grandmother's for tea, and it was the same sort of atmosphere and the same sort of personalities. So there were things which were very similar, and then other things which were very different. I might have had more difficulty leaving Durham, which I really enjoyed. But see, at that stage I'd moved to Oxford, and I found Oxford a very strange place. Interesting in lots of ways, but not the kind of place I decided I wanted to spend the rest of my life in. So I didn't really have a problem leaving Oxford, I have to say, no. And I was getting, perhaps the most homesick that I ever got in the 8 years was possibly in the last year or two, and I was beginning to tell stories about, you know, when people get killed in car accidents, they're sort of named on the Irish news, and things like that were beginning to strike me as differences between Ireland and England. I had to make up my mind, was I going to stay? I was rowing at that stage, and I was in the blue boat crew in the squad, the development squad in the summer, and essentially I could have stayed and sort of scraped a living and continued rowing and tried to get my blue, which I have to say I was quite tempted by, or alternatively come home and try and get a real job and be an adult. And reluctantly I decided maybe coming home and being an adult might be better. The Celtic Tiger was only beginning, but it was still just potential. really, rather than that much change had actually happened. So people were feeling quite happy, but the changes hadn't come yet, whereas now the changes have happened in a more obvious fashion. It's not so much a shock to see people of different cultures on the streets of Dublin or Limerick. I think it's very different, certainly for me, because as an English-speaking Irish person, I migrated into an English-speaking environment, and there weren't a lot of other Irish around. And it was a culture that was used to accepting Irish people. I think that is a much easier thing in many ways. There's a difference between when you're working in what is your own country, and particularly if you're somebody like me and you work on things to do with culture and so forth. If you're talking about them to an audience as a foreign culture, to another group of foreigners, it doesn't have quite the same function or purpose as when you're talking about them and taking part in as a living culture and belonging to the society you're talking about. Yeah, and the other thing is, I like the anarchy of Ireland, I have to say. Although I get very frustrated about life in Ireland lots of times, and I think with a certain fondness of a British sense of civic responsibility, and you know, if you're sitting 6 hours in an accident and emergency, and you think, God, when they complain about the NHS, they really don't know what they're talking about. But with all its warts, this is where I prefer to live.